It's a well-known fact that the bulk of the world's resources are in Africa, but beneficiation usually takes place outside of the continent, with goods returning as final products ready for consumption. This means most of the profit is made and enjoyed elsewhere. Although Africa has taken strides to produce more of its own goods, it's been a slow process.
The structural transformation of African economies is in process, but remains incomplete. The share of agriculture in GDP is falling almost everywhere, but it is the share of services that's rising primarily, with manufacturing also falling.
Falling manufacturing is what needs to change. Management consultancy McKinsey forecasts consumer spending to be at $1.4 trillion by 2020. These are consumers the continent should be taking advantage of. Several miners, bankers and trading houses are heeding the call. They are positioning themselves to exploit emerging trade routes on the continent. With demand growth from China tailing off, Africa should invest in itself.
When we look at the sources of that growth, we find that it's primarily driven by factor accumulation, i.e. investment, more capital, both physical capital, infrastructure, plants, machinery, and human capital, driven by a more educated labor force. All that is good news, but in only relatively few countries.
The trick in getting it right remains knowing your market and adapting your product or service to fit the tastes and changing consumption patterns of each individual market. Innovation remains key, and of course, adapting to changing income levels. McKinsey says one way that Africa could supply local markets is by using resources as bargaining chips to get investors to set up processing and manufacturing plants. But there are many challenges limiting internal trade. Among them, poor infrastructure, including power supply, red tape, corruption and government commitments. A UN study has found that intra-Africa trade represents just 11% of total trade, compared with about 70% with Europe. Johannesburg.
Know more about your world.
eNCA.com